All right. Well, hey, we're back at it. What is this, episode five? Yeah, so we're back at
Mhm.
episode five for Figure It Out. Thank you for joining us today. And today I am accompanied. I'm introducing our group, but I'm accompanied by Jennifer Thompson and Sanjay Lalwani as always. It's
Hello.
nice to see you again. Nice to hear you, I suppose, is how we should be saying it. But today's topic is really kind of continuing that thread that we've been talking about, with grad school, applying to grad school, having that funding. And today we're kind of jumping into that navigating, the first semester of grad school. So you've made it in, you're in it now. What do you do? How do you adjust to academic life, the expectations, and who are you as a grad student? So yeah, let's kind of jump into it. So I guess in the opening, just to kind of get started, I'm wonder if it might be helpful to, um, just identify that academia is not a neutral terrain. It's a whole culture machine with its own implicit norms that sometimes go often or sometimes go unnamed, and but they can absolutely shape the way that we engage with things. So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
I think, any institution has a culture, right? No matter where we are, there is a culture, and being part of the institution, or specifically being part of an institution as a grad student, um, you have to adapt, or first of all, understand what the culture is, and then adapt to it. And of course, there will be um, things that conflict, norms and practices that conflict,
Right.
and it's navigating that as well. And I think those are probably the things that when you're first in, as you say, you've been admitted, you're in, and day one, on like 1st of September or whatever, whenever the term starts, it's a process of finding out and navigating the culture of the institution.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and I think it's important to consider the how should I put this, like espoused culture versus the unspoken culture. So, and that can apply to many different things, but some of it might be things like um there are program requirements or there are program recommendations, and then you might end up participating in a slightly different way, or you might end up interested in something in a slightly different way, and that's totally okay, so long as you recognize that there are certain expectations. Like, as much as most schools won't come out right and say it, getting to know your institution may involve, for example, volunteering your time for things, whereas the institutional sort of messaging might be that you should always get compensation for the work you do. And so recognizing that, or recognizing that there's an emphasis. So the school might be very well known for a specific type related to your major. So,
Hmm.
for example, if we're talking about education a lot, if you're doing education, they might be really, really good at a specific type of education, and like literacy or special education or things like that. And so recognizing that doesn't mean that your field, if you're not in that field, obviously is not appreciated, but that might get a little bit more emphasis. So it's then your job to advocate for your field or your area of interest. And again, that those are things you learn over time, um, that you kind of have to figure out once you get in.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, I mean, those are really good points to like to bring up, especially about just the shaping of what academia is, even like you said, like the unspoken or versus the actual spoken, the stuff that is shared to the forefront of what we're expecting or what builds our expectations. And I think it's important to just even for any listeners, but really to understand that, we're not saying that this is an expert view, but this is a perception of how it can come from. And so one of the questions I think is really would be interesting to kind of jump into would be what's one unspoken rule that you've bumped into when starting grad school?
Yeah, unspoken rules. It's interesting because if I'm thinking about unspoken rules, the one that comes to me immediately, Frankie or Francois, is the idea of work-life balance, in the sense that the spoken rule is always you have to make sure you have time for yourself and make time for your life and make time for what you love and make time for your family and work and things like that. And there are a lot of professors who model that really well and who go home at 5:30 or 5 o'clock. Um, But generally speaking, despite that being, and all professors, whether they have that philosophy or not, will say it. But then in reality, it's the midnight emails, or it's the giving you extra work, or it's providing additional opportunities to people that were willing to take on that extra work. And again,
Right, right.
absolutely no judgment on the university professors or the institutions that decide to go that route. But like most fields, while we're beyond a time period where you got to put in your dues, kid. You have to do unpaid internships for 5 years before you're able to get an opportunity. More opportunities come to people who do more work, who take more initiative,
Yeah,
who participate in more things. And by the nature of that work, while balancing your graduate studies, it tends to mean the people that spend more time in the work get those opportunities.
yeah, well said. Yeah, that's
Mm,
definitely one of the
no,
rules that I've bumped into.
yeah. Um, it's interesting because as you asked that question, Francois, and as you were responding, Jen, I was thinking about um students who may have come directly, graduate students who may have come directly from like a master's program into a PhD versus students that may have done an undergraduate degree, worked in industry for a little bit, and then come into a master's program. And in more often than not, the time period between the undergraduate and the graduate program is usually longer than between the master's and the PhD. Um, so even though, like for myself, I did my master's program in another country and a PhD here, there wasn't a lot that surprised me when I got here. Um, However, that said, before I got here, my supervisor, and I think this was something that helped with the adjustment. My supervisor put me in contact with the rest of the supervisory group, um, and I had lots of conversations with them about the institution and the way it
Right.
works and
Yeah.
and things like that. How do you get accustomed to the institution and the culture of the institution, and where do you seek support? And it's really through colleagues who've been here,
Hmm.
and the supports that they offer and they can offer and things, and even the oh, if this is what you are looking for, this is where you go, or this is who you approach, or this is the office you go to within the institution, or oh, and did you know we had this sort of facility, these sorts of facilities on campus, those sorts of things, and I think it just depends on really preparing yourself, and getting to know people even before you start, for that. but
Right.
but like I say, for me, um because there was very little time between the master's and the PhD, in terms of sort of culture shock or unwritten rules, there was not really a lot there that I wasn't expecting. One thing that did surprise me when I got the one thing, when I got to a North American academic institution, is the number of fees that they charge for
Yeah.
various things.
Yeah.
That came as a
Yeah.
total
There's a breathing
surprise.
fee, there's a reading fee,
Yeah.
there's a application
a fee
fee,
a fee for
registration
this and a
fee.
fee for that and a fee for this, and some of
Yeah.
them are mandatory and some of them are optional,
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter whether you use the service or not, they're mandatory. And that really was not something I had experienced before, which was a little bit of a sort of, oh, is this the way it's done here, sort of thing. Yeah, that was probably the one culture sort of shock, if you like, that I experienced. It was, oh, we weren't really told about this in the lead up to the start or it's not sort of made clear in the lead up to the start of the program.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely it's kind of mind blowing sometimes the the things that kind of creep up that maybe are a little bit more embedded in how they're presented, right? So yeah, like I kind of what you're speaking, the unspoken rules. I think a lot about connection. What you were saying too about the different expectations we bring into the institution and whatnot. But I think a lot about connection, and for me, I think it was networking that really surprised me as an unspoken rule because. Jen, like to your point when we were saying, the work-life balance and so that's something that we talk a lot about, and networking I think is another one of those pieces. But for me, I realized that networking also developed. It's like kind of like a layered approach in grad school where you have networks of people that can support. That work with you and support your work. They have people that can help revise your work. You have people that you feel comfortable, sharing some of your life with. And so, I found that yeah, networking was a bit of a surprising thing to me. But another surprising thing for me was, my shift in productivity. And so how I've approached productivity and what I actually consider to be productive. As it's no secret, I think Jen alluded to it, that productivity is kind of like the currency of
Mm.
academia and grad school, at least.
Yep.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I'm curious about just our general, as a group, we don't have to make it formally turns or anything like that, but, our general understanding of productivity. So for me, as a teacher beforehand, I felt I would box a lot of my time together, but as a grad student, I found that I'm a little bit more fluid in how I approach productive tasks. So I might embed some in others, or I might tackle some at the middle of the night because that's just when the ideas come, right? Like yeah, yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Frankie. I think that was a big surprise for me. The sort of relationship and how the even just the concept of productivity changes. And I think the biggest sort of recognition or change that I found is I was very strategic when it came to tackling things as a teacher. So again, speaking specifically with the field of education, you're planning a lesson for the next day, or you're planning a unit that you're currently in, or you're planning your next unit if you're trying to prepare in advance. But it is very singular and focused, I find. And you might be teaching 4 courses if you're teaching high school, and so you might split your focus in that sense, but rarely are you jumping between your history class and your English class and
Yeah,
your math class
yeah,
as you're doing lesson planning, for example, in the same meeting, let's say, let alone the same session. Whereas I find I was really surprised how different the definition of productive is, and both the I don't want to say like the inherent contradiction, but I'm gonna say the inherent contradiction
yeah,
in the sense
Yep.
that, sort of the
yeah.
prevalent thought is almost always like you're only as good as your last publication, or what did
Right,
you add to
yeah,
your CV this month?
Yeah.
And that's your definition of productive. But also because academics, particularly academics in the social sciences. Again, we can't. I
yeah,
certainly can't speak
yeah.
to
It's not
the
expertise, yeah.
yeah, to the hard sciences, quote unquote. But this idea of, because academics are on so many different projects and exploring so many different fields, and extending so many different tendrils, that you might have a meeting about an article that you're planning on writing that you're not going to actually take pen to paper for 8 months, and you're planning and timelining things. And I found that almost like shocking, that
Yeah,
you would be willing to say, okay, let's meet for an hour today, and then we'll meet in 2 weeks, and then we'll meet in 2 weeks after that, then we'll meet in 2 weeks, to just inch the project forward. And that's seen as productive, as opposed to just wholesale focusing on that project and getting it done. But the problem is you
yeah.
can't possibly do that because you're doing 20 different
There's
things.
other things, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So that was a big difference in sort of the definition of productivity, in the one hand it's traditional, it's the you need to be publishing every year, you need to be doing, TA ships and RA ships, but then also you're doing so many things that
Yeah.
there are things that are very productive if you can write one article a year.
Right. Yeah. And take care of yourself in between all
Yep.
that too, right? So
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Just jumping off on that as well, and if you're talking about publications and things like that, which is an expectation if you're in academia, but going down to the looking at it from the graduate student sort of lens as well, with it in a structure like ours at our institution, where the first year is coursework.
Yeah.
And for me, my supervisor would say, look at the coursework that you've got to do and the assessment pieces that you got to submit, and work towards sort of tailoring them towards your research.
Right.
And for me, my whole research changed anyway. So it's that idea of how, when I'm not sure about the nitty gritty of my PhD research
Hmm.
study, how do how am I, going to be productive in deciding on how I phrase or tailor an assignment or assessment piece that I've been given towards that's unclear, that's fuzzy.
It's challenging, and there's like, and I think that's what's it really captures like both of what you've shared is it really captures that kind of idea of grad school in general. It's a very complex thing. It's fluid, and it has boundaries, but it doesn't. I don't know. It's really hard
Yes.
to put a name to it. And in some cases, those boundaries are things that students, and in my experience, I've had to kind of discover through kind of making those mistakes. And just like it might be an all-nighter, or I might be more productive on something other than what I was supposed to be productive on. And so there's a degree of like flexibility in how you approach things, and then you got to take care, like Sanjay, like you said, the other responsibilities, coursework, finding ways to embed that in your own research or embed your article writing part of that. So it's yeah, I think if we could well, I can't speak for everybody, but if I could make a recommendation, it'd definitely be like approaching productivity in a creative lens, in just understanding that productivity, like Jen said, has that definition that can kind of shift, and it isn't really concrete to everybody, especially even like your own personal experiences.
If we talk about productivity, we also talk about, expectation, as well as that, and understanding well what the expectations are. Um,
Mhm.
is it just my supervisor who expects, or who's that? And that's why they recommend that you tailor coursework to your possible eventual PhD study, or is that an expectation across all faculty members that that's what you'll be doing, or um, is it an institutional expectation? And then how do you be how can you be productive within perhaps competing expectations?
Mm.
Yeah, I just want to kind of jump in and sort of tie together what we've been talking about in terms of unspoken rules as well as definitions of productivity, in the sense that I think your example, Sanjay, of a supervisor or an advisor or someone at the institution telling you that you should choose courses and you should choose research projects and you should choose
Yes.
work that's related to your field, whether you're doing a master's or PhD, especially obviously thesis rather than course based. Um, this idea of everything needs to be connected to your singular or your small circle of area of interest, when you might
Yes.
have a very nebulous area of interest, or you might
Yeah.
want to explore different
Yes.
things. And so again, it's one of those a unspoken rules that there is no requirement that all your courses have to be focused on your area of interest.
Yeah.
There's no requirement that everything needs to be related to what you ultimately focus on within your field. But at the same time, that is something that is common amongst multiple professors at multiple institutions, in my experience, certainly.
Mm.
That is how you be productive with your time, with your
Yes.
limited time. They say that you're allowed to take, let's say, 6 courses. You're required to take 6 courses to graduate, and most supervisors or advisors will recommend that all of those are related to your
Yes.
field or
Yes.
your subfield. And then if you're really interested in that extra course, then that's an extra course. And A,
Mhm.
there's no rule that says that. Once you do the credit
Yes.
cards,
Yeah.
you can do whatever you want. But B, I do understand where they're coming from, in the sense that you do want to make quote unquote good use of your time in order to maintain that balance, in order to be productive, in the sense that if you are taking courses and you are doing research projects that are related to your field, you are directly and indirectly advancing your knowledge in the field through the work you're doing. So
Yes.
you're building up knowledge of fame of well-known authors in the field. You're learning about how to teach that material. You're doing research on different understandings of that area in the field, for example. And you're taking courses that are going to help you when you write your own thesis. Um,
Yeah.
but at the same time, some of us have varied interest, and you want to go explore
Yes.
that one off thing that has nothing to do with your current area of study, but maybe you're going to be able to tie it in the future.
Mm.
So to tie this back to sort of advice, is while it's not bad advice, and there's a reason why professors will often give you that advice, don't let yourself be hamstrung by that advice, thinking that it is the best way
Mm.
to move forward. if you have an interest, a curiosity, or to back to Frankie's point, another way you can be productive in taking courses that aren't related to directly to what you want to study is if there's a professor you want to work with, then taking that
Yeah,
course is a networking opportunity. And if you have,
Absolutely.
depending on the institution you attend, your supervisor will have varying levels of authority over the courses you take. Some need to approve it. Some you just need to consult with. Some they just need to sign it. Some you don't even need to have any approval. They don't need to
just
follow the
go for
process
it.
at all.
Go
Yeah.
They're just there to
just
help you with
rock up,
reading and
yeah.
writing. And so if they are, for example, if you're at an institution where they have a great deal of power and they have to approve and sign off on the courses you choose, um, telling them that it's about networking, it's about working with that professor, it's about
Yeah.
getting to know, the researchers in that field because you want to build a connection later because it's related to some side element. But also if you don't know what you want to study, you want to try different things because you're not sure. And
Yeah.
especially in the masters, in the PhD, generally you want to know what you want to study. Otherwise, why are you taking 4 years to do it? But your masters, you may not know. So
Yeah.
trying a bunch of different things is very rational and is still a very productive use of your
Yeah.
time because you're exploring the field.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And this is where, I mean, we talk about connections. This is where um, um, making it a point of networking even with graduate student colleagues and not just sort of, hi, what's your name and all that, but, you know, where your interest areas, not only the the interest area or the area for study for your master's or your PhD, but wider. What are your interest areas?
Hmm.
And things like that. I personally, I take an approach that I will speak to as many graduate colleagues as I can and try and understand their work. Um, uh, because I think at the end of the day, what's the quote? We're all each other's libraries. Um, so yeah, no, that's the sort of approach I take. Um, uh, of course, when there is time and opportunities, because as you go through your program, as you know, so much time is then spent on your own work that those connection opportunities become fewer and far between.
Hmm.
Especially in this day and age where a lot of people, I wouldn't say most people, a lot of people work from the comfort of their own spaces in their own homes rather than at faculties spaces or libraries or places like that.
Right. And I mean, you bring up excellent points about some of the different, challenges that kind of rise up and that we kind of talk to. They kind of emerge from the experience. We talked about the coursework or wanting to pursue different interests or rabbit holes. I mean, that's so, if there's one thing that's characteristic about academia for myself, it's going down rabbit holes. And I find that maybe the
Yes.
the term you used, Jen, earlier about tendrils is probably the best way to describe it, where profs might be rooted in different kind of systems or different, well, systems, but worlds or fields or realities. And those are sometimes really beneficial to kind of go down and if you want to explore a different path. And I know for myself, it has definitely contributed to a different research interest and has enhanced my research because of that. I'm curious about one last thing that I'm really curious about is if anybody else has experienced imposter syndrome through their kind of engaging with this world, coming into that first term, I think for myself was so charged with expectations that I brought into the program, expectations that came out of my new interactions, networking, making new friends. So I definitely experienced imposter syndrome, and actually, to be very honest with you, I still do. There's a lot of times where I'll be presenting a session, and I'll be like, "Am I the right person to be presenting this? Like, are you sure you want me to present this?" So yeah, I just wonder if imposter syndrome is something that other graduate students might encounter or might have something to navigate around.
I think that's something that every graduate student experiences. Certainly, people I've spoken to in colleagues, graduate student colleagues that I've spoken to, all say the same thing. So I don't think it's an unusual sort of feeling amongst a graduate student group. It did it surprise me when sort of I went through phases of feeling like that? Yes, I did because I thought to myself, oh, I I don't know as much as that person, or I don't, or as you said, Frankie, am I the best person to speak about this? Am I, do I have the depth of understanding or background, or to to have it, speak to a group of people about this? Yeah, I've had those sorts of experiences.
I think for me, actually, the most acute sense of, and to answer your question, yes, yes, I
Yeah.
did. I felt it most acutely sort of between getting my acceptance and starting the program, actually, because I think I still had this impression of, oh, a master's degree or a PhD, oh, that's so lofty, it's such a high level, like so few people have it, and you have to be a certain type of person to be able to do that. And,
Yeah.
I had these very, um, uh sort of pedestalite, like, as if lifting the program on a
Yeah.
pedestal,
Yes.
um ideas of what it meant to be a master's student or what it meant to be a PhD student, and the kind of person you had to be and the kind of experiences you had to have. And, going to the faculty, one of the things I learned was that's not true. And there's
Yeah.
a variety of
Yeah.
people from a variety
Yeah.
of different backgrounds, and there's nothing
Yeah.
there's nothing stopping you from jumping into a master's program regardless of your background. And so it was, until the next stage of imposter syndrome came in, it was really reassuring to see people that had gone straight through, or that were teachers like I was, or there were people who were working in the field for 10 years or working in a totally different field. Like, in education, one of the great things about our program is that we're at the intersection of a lot of different fields. So you get people who are not teachers, um,
Yeah.
who are not in education in the traditional sense, but they work in healthcare, or they work in politics, or they work in public policy, or they work in advocacy. And the idea is that knowledge mobilization aspect, or that educating a company if they're a business person, or training doctors, training nurses. Those are all aspects of um, education that means that they might want to pursue a higher degree in education, despite not being teachers, or not being related to education at all prior to this moment. And so I thought that was really interesting to see how wide the field was. And obviously, that may not be the same for engineering, or biological sciences, or things like that. That might be a much narrower field, but I feel very fortunate to be in education because we have such a wide field. But I found that coming in, I felt incredibly nervous, and I felt like I didn't belong, and I felt like it was going to be so difficult for me. And then I got here, and I found that there were people who were very similar to me, people who were very different to me, but we were all kind of at a fairly level-esque
Yeah.
playing
Yes.
field. And then
Yeah.
the second sort of wave of imposter syndrome came uh, when I found that there was a bit of a divide in the emphasis in practice
Mhm.
versus emphasis in theory people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's
Yes.
this desire in the field to, like, oh, if you're going to advance the field, if you're going to have this revolutionary change, you need to fundamentally break down what it means to be an educator, what it means to be an advocate, or what it means to be to engage in X, Y, or Z field, versus myself, where I came from a very much like I was a teacher, I was an administrator.
Mhm.
I wanted to research why students were feeling alienated in their school,
Yeah.
and I want to be able to tell my teachers tomorrow, here's one thing you can do today to make your child feel more included, or to make your students feel more included. And so, that kind of divide between, if you want to change the world, you have to know everything there is to know about the theory, and you may not, like, the answer won't come tomorrow, won't come in a week, it'll come in years down the
Yeah.
line, but we need to be looking ahead to that. That was a divide that I felt very unprepared for. And so that definitely gave me a little bit of imposter syndrome, in the sense of, like, I've never really thought about the world that way. And so I really had to shift how I was thinking, and how I was viewing the world. And then, slowly but sure, you realize there is an intersection there, and there's ways to tackle all that. But that was sort of the other big area for me.
Yeah. And there is that divide too. Like, I mean, Jen, you bring up a really good point of like how we approach or enter into this program. And I would say I absolutely came with it with a pragmatic lens. I just like, I have taught in this problem. I've seen this problem. Everybody says the problem just can't be changed. I don't accept that. We should do something about this problem. But then when you get in here, you start finding out that there's different, like Jen said, there's different schools of thought about it. But it introduces you into what I'm sure we'll talk about at some point, but the worldviews that researchers adopt when
Yes.
they engage with things. And so in research, there's a lot of trying to get people to stay within a certain type of frame, or when they're doing some kind of research, because it can be interpreted in so many different ways, right? And so I think there's that's a big divide too. Now that you mentioned it, that's kind of where some of my imposter syndrome came, is like, but I'm pragmatic. Like I want to solve a problem, but sometimes you need to be more theoretical. Sometimes you need to be more constructivist. Sometimes you need to be, and so yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, is just, yeah, you kind of that you don't really realize that these things are kind of impacting the way that you do your practice, but they definitely are present, maybe more subtly than in academia. But
Yeah. And I think going back to sort of what I said before, and also, the that difference between somebody coming into a master's program after maybe 10 years
mm,
in the classroom versus somebody going from a master's directly into a PhD. And there's I think that's actually um is a bigger consideration that has to be taken than we sometimes realize. Um, because as you said, you being in the classroom and for 10 years or so, or however long, and then going into a master's program, let's say, and then going, well, I've seen these problems in the classroom and I want solutions, and I want solutions now. Um, but as you say, there are so many different views that you consider or need to consider or should be considering. Um, whereas, if you've come from one academic program, like a master's, and going on to a PhD, you already have an understanding that there are multiple views, which I suppose makes the whole process even more complex.
yeah. 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 Yeah, I mean, those are really good points. And I think at the end of the day, especially on that topic of imposter syndrome, is that it's not uncommon. Like it's
Yes.
if you're feeling those kind of feelings, it's not uncommon, and they happen at different points, and they happen at different points for different people too. I think we've highlighted some of the moments that we felt it, coming into it, or clashing expectations, and um, but yeah, it's definitely not uncommon for a grad student to feel that, especially in your first term. You're experiencing a whole new world if it's your first grad program.
Yes.
So yeah, it's all I could say is, as somebody who's been there, it gets better. I don't know that it goes away, but
No.
you definitely get better at managing it. Um,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think the last thing I just want to emphasize to your point, Frankie, is that anyone can be successful in a master's program.
yeah.
Yes.
But there are amazing people that have,
Yes.
sectoral knowledge,
Yes.
but don't have the philosophical underpinning. But they are such discrete knowledge about what it's like in the
hmm
field, or that have lived experience in an area that you've never even considered.
Yes.
And so I speak as if it's other people, but you yourself, if you're thinking about a master's, or you're thinking about a PhD, or you're thinking about grad school more generally, and you're not sure if you have the right background or the right experience or the right, knowledge base to be able to do it, just do it.
Just do it.
You
Yeah,
can
Yes.
go
you
in,
you
Yes.
man.
can
That's
do it.
right.
Like, apply. You don't even have to go if you don't want to, but don't ever let the fear that, oh, I'm not the right kind of person, or I'm not meant for a grad school. If that's something that you want to pursue, like,
Yes.
you are gonna fit in somewhere, and there'll be someone who has the same sort of spectrum of experience as you, in the sense of, it might be from the field, or it might be from a lived experience, or it might be from, you know a sense of observing problems, like Frankie mentioned, or it might be
Mhm.
totally theoretical. And whether you're just going straight through from your undergrad, whether you have 10 years in the field, like, all of those perspectives are valuable, and so
Yeah,
you will bring value to your program, and you will also get value from your program.
Yes.
And don't be afraid to apply.
yeah. I think it's
And
Absolutely
never
agree.
lost.
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely agree. Yes.
Okay. Well, this has been a great session, and thank you so much, for tuning in, for joining us and listening to us. I don't know that we've figured it out yet, but we're definitely, we're breaking down some of those steps,
Mm.
and opening up that conversation to figure it out more broadly. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
thank you.